Hello and welcome back to Football Made Simple. We're back with another in-depth tactical analysis. And today it's a tactical review of the Champions League final between Klopp's Liverpool and Pochettino's Spurs. It was the first all-English final since 2008, with Poch looking for his first silverware and Klopp wanting to win his first trophy with Liverpool. In the end, the final ended 2-0 to Liverpool, thanks to a Salah penalty and a great finish from Origi. Spurs were unlucky, considering the XG indicated the match was 1.18 to Spurs and 1.26 to Liverpool. However, 0.75 of Liverpool's XG came from the penalty, so their open play expected goals was 0.51. Liverpool won't care though, so let's get into the tactics both teams used. Just quickly, if you're new around here, please like and subscribe. With the season almost over, Football Made Simple will continue to upload football content, so hit subscribe so you don't miss out. If you have video suggestions, send them to @FootballMadeSim. Now, let's get into it. We'll start with the lineups. Liverpool lined up in a 4-3-3, with Matip and Van Dijk as centre-backs, with Alexander-Arnold and Robertson wide. Fabinho was in the holding role with Henderson and Wijnaldum either side. Up front was Salah and Mane, and Firmino was past fit to start. Spurs, on the other hand, lined up in a 4-2-3-1. Alderweireld and Vertonghen were the centre-backs, with Rose and Trippier either side. Sissoko and Winks were in the double pivot role, with Ali, Eriksen and Heung-min Son just behind Harry Kane, who was past fit to start as well. A video explaining how to tactically analyse matches is in the cards now, but we'll start off with how Liverpool looked to build up during the match. Liverpool scored early, so that affected how they chose to play, but some clear patterns still emerged. When building from deep, Liverpool usually only use a single pivot in conjunction with the centre-backs. However, during the final they chose to build up play with a double pivot of Fabinho and Henderson. And at the same time, Wijnaldum would give the midfield depth by pushing higher up. During this phase, Spurs wanted to defend in a 4-2-3-1. But by using this double pivot, it meant that when Spurs were pressing high, they would have to use their entire front four. However, with Alisson being good on the ball, when Kane would press Alisson, he would be able to pass the ball into a centre-back or a midfielder, which would then allow Liverpool to progress the ball forward into the gaps left by the pressing front four. After progressing the ball into midfield, Liverpool used a few great tactics. Because Spurs had to chase the game from the second minute, they had to keep a relatively high line, so Liverpool knew they could use the pace of Salah and Mane over the top. To free up this space, a common tactic was for Roberto Firmino to drop deep into the midfield. If a centre-back followed, it left space for Mane and Salah to run into, and even occasionally Henderson. But if the centre-back remained deep, often Mane and Salah would drift wider, and with Firmino occupying an extra midfielder, it gave space to the other Liverpool midfielders to try find the pass over the top. Mane would try run behind Trippier, and Salah behind Rose. When Origi came on, with Spurs having to be even more offensive, this tactic became more pronounced as Liverpool went direct to try use Origi's pace between the centre-backs to get in on goal. Another major tactic which they used was the left-hand side overload. In order not to make this video too long, we'll be discussing that on tomorrow's podcast, so hit subscribe so you don't miss out. How about Spurs? How did they aim to attack and what was Liverpool's defensive response? Spurs initially wanted to play the ball out from the back as much as they could. Jan Vertonghen and Alderweireld would split, and Winks would drop to receive the ball off of them. But when Liverpool pressed them high, Sissoko would often drop as well to try and receive the ball. But this was a deliberate trap by Liverpool. Henderson would often give Sissoko enough space so that Lloris passed the ball to him before pressing him immediately, as he was the less technically gifted midfielder. This would play into Liverpool's hands, as it forced Spurs long, and Matip and Van Dijk won the majority of the aerial duels. As the match went on, Pochettino adapted brilliantly to this. He kept Rose and Trippier incredibly wide, meaning that when the ball went to one side of the pitch, it left the opposite fullback free, as Mane would be unsure whether to press the centre-back or stay with Trippier, which would then allow Spurs to switch the ball to the fullbacks to progress the ball forward. This often left Trippier high up the pitch, getting into great positions. However, it is also important to note that at times Liverpool were incredibly effective with their press. They often used the narrow press, allowing Spurs to get the ball centrally before closing in from the sides to cut off the wide passes. With the Spurs fullbacks wide, this meant that when there was a turnover, Mane and Salah would look to run in behind the fullbacks. As the match wore on, Poch found a way to counter this. He kept his entire front four high between the lines of Liverpool's high-pressing midfield and the defence. This meant that Liverpool's fullbacks had to defend extremely narrow, and Rose and Trippier could push even higher to be found through a quick pass or a switch. This would mean that the wingers, mainly Mane, would not know whether to press the centre-back or stay on the fullbacks. But at the same time, in the second half, Spurs found success attacking centrally. They would often go long to Kane, and Ali would look to run in behind Alexander-Arnold for the flick-on, but at the same time, Moura and Son would be ready for the second ball. Ali and Son often found spaces in these regions through this method. If Spurs used a ground pass, they changed their approach, using more first-time passes, because as the Liverpool midfield would come into the press, they'd be able to play around it. Since Spurs kept men between the lines, they were then able to use the combination play. However, Van Dijk and Matip kept their distance close, meaning Spurs couldn't penetrate, and instead they would play in front of the defence and were mainly kept to long shots. Liverpool's narrow defence did work to their advantage when defending crosses, as they always had numbers in the box. We'll cover the other tactics Spurs used and what both teams could have done differently on the podcast tomorrow, so hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss that. You'll notice that today there was no goal analysis, because in all honesty, the goals came about through a set piece, the other one was through a ball ping-ponging around the edge of the box, meaning that the goals weren't actually tactically relevant. If you want an even more detailed look into this match, as I couldn't cover everything in this video without making it too long, subscribe so you don't miss our podcast about the final tomorrow. Leave any questions about the final you want covered in the podcast in the comments below. That's our analysis for today, but just before you go, as the season draws to a close, this channel will continue to upload quality football content even during the season break, so hit subscribe to make sure that you receive all the videos and hit the bell to make sure you're notified. Our first ever podcast episode came out yesterday, covering the Europa League final in detail. So to give you a taster of what the podcast is about and what you can expect in tomorrow's Champions League podcast, enjoy the following sample. But aside from that, that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple. But here's where I really think Arsenal missed a trick. See, one of the biggest things you can do in football is create a numerical overload. So for example, graphic on screen now, when City play, when they have the opposition pinned back, their centre-backs drift really high up the pitch to increase numbers and create an overload in midfield. In fact, you often see Laporte in the left half space playing as high as most teams might play an attacking midfielder. So how does this relate to Arsenal? Well, as you can see on the graphic on screen now, in scenarios where they had control, it would have been interesting to see Monreal move up the pitch to create a 2 versus 1 against Azpilicueta. In this situation, it would have forced Chelsea to leave a midfielder wide to cover Monreal, potentially providing space for one of the Arsenal midfield to take advantage of, or a 2 versus 1 situation where Azpilicueta wouldn't be able to block the cross. To be fair to Sarri, he often kept his wingers high and wide, even when they were on the defensive, so as a result Monreal would want to stay back to prevent a 3 versus 3. And here's where we come to a concept of the disadvantages of not having top-level ball-playing centre-backs, or a ball-playing goalkeeper. And let me elaborate on this. So top ball-playing teams like Barcelona have Piqué, Bayern have Hummels, and Van Dijk at Liverpool is another example, where they would be confident enough in that situation to go higher, because they know when they get the ball, they'll keep it. So the man left behind them won't matter, as they won't directly concede a counter-attack. So when playing the back three especially, graphic on screen now, you'd want at least one of your wide centre-backs to be comfortable on the ball, because it would mean Xhaka could have stayed in midfield and maintained a 3 versus 3 in the centre of midfield. But now, when Xhaka has to create play from deep, it's drawing pressure into your own defensive half, and without a ball-playing keeper, they immediately went long from Czech, which is credit to Sarri, because this is exactly what he planned. Because you can see he always maintained his numbers to deal with the aerial threat. But if Arsenal had had a ball-playing goalkeeper, an Ederson, Ter Stegen or Neuer, graphic on screen now, it would mean if Chelsea wanted to press, they'll need to commit 5 players if Xhaka stayed back. So let's say Giroud presses the keeper. And if Chelsea wants a high press, it would mean Kovacic and Kante would have to join the press. And all of a sudden, Jorginho has a 2 versus 1 against him in Ozil and Torreira. And a clip pass into midfield would take 5 Chelsea players out of the game. Or, if Chelsea chose not to press, the ball-playing goalkeeper would find a pass to get them out of danger. Because as we know, Sarri wanted at least 3 men on Arsenal's 2 forwards for the long pass. So a ball-playing centre-back would mean that Xhaka wouldn't have to drop into defence. And this would create a 3 versus 2 in favour of Arsenal in the midfield.